Okay, we are going to start to talk about the different freedoms and individual rights that we can find in the Bill of Rights. So we're finally getting to what I think is some really interesting stuff and great things to talk about. So today we're going to focus exclusively on religious freedom. Here we have a whole bunch of people praying out in front of the U.S. Capitol building. And, it's just an example of people practicing their religion. And so we're going to talk about a lot of the details dealing with religious freedom today, like what are the limits on religious freedom and all of that. We'll get into some court cases that are really important and talk about some issues that are changing day to day. My favorite part of each and every day is our learning objective, so let's not forget the learning objective. Today we are going to describe the freedom of religion. We're going to describe what it means, we're going to describe the limits, we're going to describe what's allowed and what's not allowed, but all of this is important so that we can explain the balance between your individual rights and the government's power. So we're always looking for the proper balance between the government's power and individual rights. We want to make sure today that we'll be able to answer the question, what is the government's relationship to religion? So we'll be getting into all sorts of stuff today. First, just taking a look at the freedom itself and then exploring the limits and the protections there. So today we are only focusing on one part of the First Amendment. Today we'll be exclusively discussing the freedom of religion. There's a couple of parts to the freedom of religion. We'll be looking at those. We'll be looking at the limits that the courts have placed on the freedom of religion. Here we see President Trump and Vice President Pence speaking at a group whose goal is to protect religious freedom. So we'll be talking about religious freedom, and we'll be talking about the balance of protecting people's freedom against the government's power and like the government's interest in promoting and protecting religion as well. All right, so first let's focus on religious freedom and what this means, why this is so important. We know that this was important to the framers of the Constitution. We know that this was a really important right, especially for people living in the American colonies and all this kind of stuff. Freedom of religion had been discussed a lot. We know this is important because it is one of our few rights that was protected in the original Constitution. So we talked about this a couple days ago when we were doing civil liberties. We talked about how there are no religious tests for holding office. This is in Article 6. So this lets us know, like if they brought up religion in the articles of the Constitution, we know that this was one of the primary concerns of the framers. They wanted to make sure that you did not have to prove specific religious beliefs in order to run for office, or that the offices would only be held by people of a certain religion. So there's efforts made in Article 6 to prevent religious discrimination right there. And then we're going to get into the Bill of Rights. Now, this is important. This is the First Amendment, and this is the very first part of the First Amendment. And so this lets us know, like we said with Article 1, we knew they thought Congress would be the most important branch because they wrote about it first. Here, the very first individual right spelled out in the Bill of Rights is the freedom of religion. So making sure that the government does not infringe on the religious freedom of its citizens. So this is the most important right that they considered, and we will look at some of the aspects of the freedom of religion. All right, we were just saying that this is the first part of the First Amendment. That is incredibly important. Lets us know how important the framers saw it as a form of individual freedom protection. But we're going to talk about these two different parts. There are two parts to the freedom of religion outlined in the Constitution. So basically two halves of this. We're going to call one half the Establishment Clause and the other half the Free Exercise Clause. Down at the bottom, we've got the actual words of the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So that is what we call the Establishment Clause. We're going to get into the details and the limits there. And then the first part of the First Amendment goes on, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. And that second part is the Free Exercise Clause. Congress will not promote an establishment of religion. Congress will not prohibit your free exercise of religion. So those are our two clauses. We're going to focus on each one and take a look at the court cases involved. Okay, so we're just getting a little introductory information about the freedom of religion. Now we're going to look at each individual clause there, look at the establishment clause and look at the free exercise clause and talk about the different issues involved.